The champagne glass felt heavy in my hand as I watched Victoria work the room at our engagement party. She moved like she owned the place, which, technically, she did since we'd rented the entire ballroom of the Riverside Hotel. Her laugh carried across the crowd, that practiced sound she reserved for networking events and her mother's bridge club. Will, there you are, hiding by the appetizer table again. My future mother-in-law appeared beside me, her smile as sharp as her diamond earrings. You really should mingle more. These are Victoria's colleagues from the firm. I nodded and took another sip of champagne, watching Victoria chat with a group of lawyers in expensive suits. The whole scene felt surreal. Me in a rented tuxedo that scratched at my neck, surrounded by people who probably made more in a month than I did in 6. Construction management paid well enough, but not law firm well. William Blackwood? I turned to find a woman I didn't recognize standing beside me. Mid-30s, auburn hair, nervous energy radiating from her like heat from asphalt. She held a manila envelope in her hands. Yeah, that's me. Do we know each other? She glanced around the room quickly, then pressed the envelope into my hands. You need to see what's inside. I'm sorry. Before I could ask what she meant, she melted back into the crowd. I looked down at the envelope. Thick, heavy paper, my name written across the front in careful block letters. No return address. The rational part of my brain said to wait, to open it later in private. But something about the woman's expression, the way she'd looked at me with what seemed like pity, made my hands move before my mind could stop them. The first photograph made my stomach drop. Victoria, in a hotel room I didn't recognize, with someone who definitely wasn't me. I flipped through the rest with mechanical precision. More photos, text message screenshots, hotel receipts. A timeline that stretched back months, maybe longer. The man in the pictures was David Chen, Victoria's colleague at the firm. The one she always called just a friend when I asked about their late-night strategy sessions. My vision tunneled. The party sounds, laughter, clinking glasses, the string quartet Victoria had insisted on, became distant white noise. Will? Honey, what's wrong? Victoria appeared at my elbow, her face creased with concern. She must have seen my expression from across the room. Her eyes dropped to the envelope in my hands, and I watched her face change as she recognized what it contained. Oh, God, she whispered. Will, I didn't let her finish. Didn't say a word. Just handed her the envelope and walked away. The last thing I heard as I pushed through the crowd toward the exit was the sound of her crying, followed by the confused murmur of our guests, as they realized something had gone terribly wrong. 3 days later, I was still in my workshop, surrounded by half-finished projects and empty takeout containers. I'd changed the locks on the house the morning after the party, before Victoria could come home to collect her things. She'd been calling and texting nonstop, but I'd turned off my phone after the first dozen messages. The knock on my door came just after noon. I ignored it, figuring it was another delivery driver or maybe one of Victoria's friends coming to plead her case. But the knocking persisted, followed by a familiar voice. Will, I know you're in there. Open up. Eddie Kowalski, my foreman, and the closest thing I had to a best friend. I'd been avoiding him too, but Eddie wasn't the type to give up easily. I opened the door to find him standing on my porch with 2 cups of coffee and a paper bag that smelled like bacon. You look like garbage, he said, pushing past me into the house. When's the last time you showered? Nice to see you too. I followed him to the kitchen where he started unpacking breakfast sandwiches. How'd you know I was here? Lucky guess. Plus, Mrs. Hartwell next door flagged me down. Said she's been worried about you. Eddie handed me a coffee. She also said Victoria came by yesterday with some guy in a fancy car. They left when they couldn't get in. I took a sip of coffee, feeling the caffeine hit my system like a small shock. Probably David, whatever he is. The guy from the photos? Eddie's expression darkened. Man, I still can't believe she did that to you. And at your engagement party, no less. The woman who'd delivered the envelope had vanished as quickly as she'd appeared, but the damage was done. By the time I'd left the hotel that night, half the party guests had seen the photos. Victoria's reputation at the firm was probably in ruins. You know what really gets me? I said, settling into a chair across from Eddie. It wasn't just the cheating, it was how long it went on. Those receipts go back 8 months. 8 months of lies. Eddie nodded grimly. So, what's your plan? Divorce lawyer? Private investigator? I've been thinking about that. I pulled out my laptop and opened a folder I'd been working on for the past 2 days. Victoria's up for partner at her firm. Big promotion, corner office, the works. She's been talking about it for months. Okay, and? Partners need spotless reputations. No scandals, no ethical violations, no drama that could embarrass the firm. I turned the laptop toward Eddie. I've been doing some research into her recent cases, cross-referencing with David's work, looking for patterns. Eddie leaned forward, studying the screen. What kind of patterns? The kind that suggests they've been sharing confidential client information, coordinating strategies on cases where they should have been on opposite sides. Small stuff, but enough to raise questions about professional ethics. Is that legal, what you're doing? Everything I'm looking at is public record. Court filings, case outcomes, billing records that clients can request. I'm not hacking anything or breaking any laws. I closed the laptop. I'm just connecting dots that are already there. Eddie was quiet for a long moment. This isn't just about the cheating, is it? You want to destroy her career. She destroyed our relationship, our future, everything we built together. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street where Victoria and I used to take evening walks. I'm just returning the favor. And David? David's married too. His wife might be interested to know how he spends his business trips. Eddie finished his sandwich and leaned back in his chair. You sure about this, Will? Once you start down this road, there's no going back. I thought about the photos again. Victoria's face in those pictures, happy, carefree, completely different from the woman who'd been planning our wedding. She'd been living a double life for months, maybe longer. The engagement party was just when it all came crashing down. She made her choice, I said. Now I'm making mine. The law firm of Morrison, Bailey and Associates occupied 3 floors of a glass tower downtown. I'd been there exactly twice, once for their Christmas party, once for a partner's retirement dinner. Both times Victoria had introduced me as her contractor boyfriend, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Now I sat in my truck across the street, watching the morning rush of lawyers and staff filing into the building. Victoria's car was already in the parking garage, a silver BMW that had been a reward for landing a big client last year. My phone buzzed with a text from Eddie. Package delivered. Conference room B, 2nd floor. Anonymous tip to the managing partner's assistant. I'd spent the weekend putting together a comprehensive file. Photos from the envelope, yes, but also financial records showing suspicious patterns in Victoria and David's case assignments. Hotel receipts that coincided with court dates in other cities. Email metadata that suggested they'd been coordinating outside official channels. Nothing illegal, but plenty that would raise eyebrows in a profession built on trust and ethical boundaries. The morning passed slowly. I grabbed coffee from a shop down the street and found a bench where I could watch the building's entrance. Just after lunch, I saw what I'd been waiting for. David Chen walking quickly toward his car, phone pressed to his ear, his face pale. 20 minutes later, Victoria emerged. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she fumbled with her car keys. Her phone was ringing as she got into the BMW. I followed her at a distance, curious where she'd go. Not home. She still didn't have keys to the house. Instead, she drove to a coffee shop on the other side of town, the kind of place where lawyers met clients they didn't want to be seen with. David was already there when she arrived, sitting in a corner booth with his back to the wall. I parked across the street and pulled out the telephoto lens I'd borrowed from Eddie's nephew, a photography student who owed me a favor. Through the lens, I could see them talking intensely. Victoria's hands moved as she spoke, the way they always did when she was upset. David kept checking his phone, glancing toward the door like he expected someone to walk in and arrest them both. After an hour, they left separately. David first, then Victoria, 10 minutes later. She sat in her car for a long time before starting the engine, and I could see her shoulders shaking. Part of me, a small part, almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered the photos, the lies, the 8 months of planning a future with someone who was living a completely different life behind my back. I drove home and uploaded the photos from the coffee shop to my computer. Victoria and David in crisis mode, probably trying to figure out how much the firm knew and whether their careers were salvageable. My phone had 17 missed calls from Victoria and 3 voicemails I hadn't listened to. I deleted them all without playing them. Eddie came by that evening with Chinese takeout and updates from his network of contacts around town. "Word's getting around," he said, settling into my kitchen chair. "My cousin works at the courthouse. Says there's talk about Morris and Bailey reviewing some recent cases, looking for conflicts of interest. How long before it gets back to their clients? Couple days, maybe. Once lawyers start talking, news travels fast." Eddie opened a container of lo mein. "You sure Victoria doesn't suspect you're behind this?" "She might suspect, but she can't prove anything. The tip was anonymous, and everything in that file came from public sources." I picked at my food, not really hungry. Besides, she's got bigger problems right now than figuring out who exposed her. What's next? I'd been thinking about that all day. The professional angle was just the beginning. Victoria cared about her reputation, her standing in the community. She'd built her identity around being successful, respected, above reproach. Time to tear that down, too. "You still have contacts at the newspaper? The Society page editor?" Eddie grinned. "Jenny Martinez. She loves a good scandal, especially when it involves the country club crowd. Think she'd be interested in a story about professional ethics violations at one of the city's most prestigious law firms. With photos and documentation? She'd probably give you the front page." I nodded, already planning my next move. Victoria had humiliated me in front of everyone we knew. Now it was her turn to feel exposed, vulnerable, watching her carefully constructed life fall apart piece by piece. The envelope that started this whole mess was still sitting on my kitchen counter. I picked it up, studying the careful handwriting of my name across the front. Whoever that woman was, she'd given me more than evidence of an affair. She'd given me the tools to rebuild my life on the ruins of Victoria's. The newspaper article hit on Thursday morning. Not front page, but close enough. Page 3 of the Metro section with a headline that read, "Ethics Questions Surround Local Law Firm." Jenny Martinez had done her homework, interviewing former clients and legal experts about the potential implications of the evidence I'd provided. Victoria's name wasn't mentioned directly, but anyone who knew the firm would be able to connect the dots. The article referenced 2 associates and potential conflicts of interest in high-profile cases. In a town this size, that was as good as putting their photos on a billboard. I was having breakfast at Murphy's Diner when my phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. "You bastard!" Victoria's voice was raw, like she'd been crying for hours. "I know this was you. I don't know what you're talking about." The newspaper article. The anonymous tip to the firm. All of it. Her voice cracked. "They put me on administrative leave, Will. They're reviewing every case I've worked on for the past year. Maybe you should have thought about that before you started sharing confidential information with your boyfriend." Silence on the other end. Then, "It wasn't like that. David and I never—" 8 months, Victoria. 8 months of hotel receipts and text messages and lies. Don't tell me what it was or wasn't like. Please. The word came out as barely a whisper. "Can we just talk? Face to face? I can explain everything." "There's nothing to explain, and there's nothing to talk about." I hung up and turned off my phone. But she was right about one thing. I was behind it all. And I wasn't finished. That afternoon, I drove to David's neighborhood. He lived in an upscale development on the north side of town, the kind of place where every house looked like it belonged in a magazine. His wife, Jennifer, was a pediatric nurse at the children's hospital. They had 2 kids, both in elementary school. I'd never met Jennifer, but I'd seen her at a few firm events. Quiet, seemed genuinely nice. The kind of person who deserved to know what her husband had been doing on his business trips. I parked down the street from their house and waited. The kids would be home from school soon, and I didn't want them to be around for what was about to happen. At 4:30, a yellow school bus stopped at the corner. 2 kids got off, a boy who looked about 8 and a girl, maybe 6. They ran up the driveway to where Jennifer was waiting on the front porch. I gave them an hour to settle in, then walked up to the front door. Jennifer answered on the second knock, still wearing her scrubs from work. "Can I help you?" "Mrs. Chen, my name is William Blackwood. I think we need to talk about your husband." Her face went pale. "Is David all right? Has something happened?" "He's fine, physically, but there are some things you should know." I held up a manila envelope, not the original, but a copy I'd made. "May I come in?" She led me to the living room, where children's toys were scattered across the carpet and family photos covered every surface. David smiled down at us from a dozen different frames: vacations, birthdays, school plays. "What's this about?" Jennifer asked, settling into a chair across from me. I handed her the envelope. "Your husband has been having an affair with a colleague. This contains evidence: photos, hotel receipts, text messages. I thought you deserved to know." She opened the envelope with shaking hands. I watched her face change as she processed what she was seeing: confusion, then understanding, then something that looked like relief. "How long?" she asked finally. "At least 8 months, based on what I found." "Probably longer." "And you are?" "The other victim. David's been sleeping with my fiancé. Former fiancé." Jennifer nodded slowly, still looking through the papers. I knew something was wrong. He's been distant, distracted, working late all the time. She looked up at me. "Why are you telling me this? Why not let me figure it out on my own?" "Because I know what it's like to be the last one to know, to find out in the worst possible way." I stood up. "What you do with this information is up to you, but you deserve to have it." I left her sitting in her living room, surrounded by photos of a life that had just been revealed as a lie. In the driveway, I passed David's car pulling in. He saw me through the windshield, and his face went white. By the time he got to the front door, I was already driving away. My phone was full of messages when I turned it back on. Victoria mostly, but also a few numbers I didn't recognize. Probably reporters, following up on the newspaper story. I deleted them all and drove home, feeling something that might have been satisfaction. Victoria and David had torn apart two relationships, two families, two futures. Now they were getting a taste of what that felt like. But I wasn't finished. Not even close. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. I was in my workshop Saturday morning, working on a cabinet that had been sitting half-finished since before the engagement party, when I heard a car door slam in my driveway. Through the window, I saw David Chen walking toward my front door. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Wrinkled clothes, unshaven, hair disheveled. Behind him, Victoria sat in the passenger seat of his car, her face hidden behind dark sunglasses. I met him at the door before he could knock. "We need to talk," he said. "No, we don't." I started to close the door, but he put his hand against it. "Please, just 5 minutes." I looked past him to Victoria in the car. She was watching us through the windshield, her posture tense. "Fine, 5 minutes, but she stays in the car." David nodded and followed me into the living room. Up close, he looked even worse. Red eyes, nervous energy, the smell of too much coffee, and not enough sleep. "You have to stop this," he said without preamble. "The newspaper article. Talking to my wife, it has to end. I don't have to do anything." Jennifer left me, took the kids, and went to her mother's house. His voice cracked. "They won't even talk to me. That's between you and your family. And Victoria's been suspended pending a full investigation. They might disbar her, Will. Her entire career could be over." I sat down on the couch, studying his face. "You should have thought about that before you decided to cheat on your respective partners for 8 months. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. We never meant to get caught." I laughed, but there was no humor in it, or to hurt anyone. "Because you definitely hurt people, David. You just didn't care, as long as it was convenient." He ran his hands through his hair. "What do you want? Money? I can pay you to stop this." "I don't want your money." "Then what? What will it take to make this end?" I leaned back, considering the question. What did I want? Victoria's career destroyed? David's marriage ruined? Both of those things were already happening. I want you to understand what you took from me, I said finally. I want you to know what it feels like to have your life torn apart by someone you trusted. We understand. We're sorry. We're both sorry. No, you're not. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry there are consequences. But you're not sorry for what you did. I stood up. Your 5 minutes are up. David looked like he wanted to argue, but something in my expression must have convinced him it wouldn't help. He walked to the door, then turned back. This won't bring her back, you know. Destroying us won't fix what happened. I'm not trying to fix anything, I said. I'm just making sure you both understand that actions have consequences. After he left, I watched through the window as he got back into the car. Victoria leaned toward him, clearly asking what had happened. Even from a distance, I could see her shoulders slump when he shook his head. They sat there for almost 10 minutes, talking intensely. Finally, Victoria got out of the car and walked toward my door. I almost didn't answer, almost let her stand there knocking until she gave up and left. But curiosity won out. She looked as bad as David, pale, thin, like she'd lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. The confident, polished woman I'd fallen in love with was gone, replaced by someone who looked fragile and desperate. Hello, Will. Victoria. Can I come in? No. She nodded like she'd expected that answer. I deserve that. I deserve all of this. Yes, you do. I never meant for it to happen. David and we were working together on the Patterson case, spending long hours. I don't care how it started. I know you don't believe me, but I love you. I've always loved you. What happened with David, it was a mistake. A terrible mistake. But it's over now. I studied her face, looking for any sign of the woman I'd planned to marry. When did it start, Victoria? The real timeline, not whatever story you've been telling yourself. She was quiet for a long moment. Last Christmas, the firm party. Almost a year, not 8 months. A full year of lies. A year of planning our wedding while she was sleeping with someone else. Thank you for finally telling the truth, I said. Now get off my property. Will, please, get off my property or I'll call the police. She stepped back like I'd slapped her. I'm going to fight this, you know. The suspension, the investigation. I'm going to clear my name. Good luck with that. And when I do, when this is all over, maybe we can... There is no we, Victoria. There never will be again. I closed the door and locked it, leaving her standing on my porch. Through the window, I watched her walk slowly back to David's car. They drove away without looking back. That evening, Eddie came by with pizza and beer. He took one look at my face and whistled low. Rough day? David and Victoria paid me a visit, wanted me to stop ruining their lives. And you said? I said actions have consequences. Eddie opened 2 beers and handed me one. You know, there's something I should probably tell you. About that woman who gave you the envelope at the party? I looked up from my pizza. You know who she was? Jenny Martinez did some digging for her follow-up article. Turns out it was David's girlfriend, not his wife, but someone else he was seeing on the side. I stared at him. David was cheating on Victoria too? Apparently, this other woman found out about Victoria and decided to blow up everyone's life at once. Your engagement party was just convenient timing. The irony was almost too much to process. Victoria had been cheating on me with David, who had been cheating on his wife with Victoria and someone else entirely. A web of lies and betrayal that made my own situation look simple by comparison. Does Victoria know? Not yet, but she will. The girlfriend's been talking to reporters, giving interviews. Apparently, she has even more evidence. Photos, recordings, financial records. I took a long drink of beer, trying to process this new information. Victoria's world was about to get even smaller. You feel sorry for her yet? Eddie asked. I thought about it, really thought about it. Victoria crying on my porch, begging for forgiveness. David's desperate attempt to make a deal. Both of them watching their carefully constructed lives collapse in real time. No, I said finally, I don't. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the engagement party that had changed everything. I was having coffee at Murphy's Diner when Jenny Martinez slid into the booth across from me. Thought you'd want to see this before it hits the stands tomorrow, she said, sliding a newspaper proof across the table. The headline read, Law Firm Scandal Deepens. Associate Linked to Multiple Affairs. Below it was a photo of David Chen walking out of Morrison Bailey's offices, carrying a cardboard box. They fired him? I asked. Yesterday afternoon. Turns out, your evidence was just the tip of the iceberg. Once they started digging, they found a pattern going back years. David's been using his position to meet women, clients, opposing counsel, court reporters. Victoria was just the latest. I scanned the article, recognizing quotes from the woman who delivered the envelope, David's other girlfriend, whose name was Rebecca Torres. She'd given Jenny everything: hotel receipts, photos, recorded phone conversations, even evidence that David had been billing personal expenses to client accounts. What about Victoria? Still suspended, but they haven't fired her yet. Apparently, she's cooperating with the investigation, trying to save her career. Jenny leaned forward. Rebecca says Victoria had no idea about the other women. She thought she was David's only affair. The betrayal within the betrayal. Victoria had risked everything for a man who saw her as just another conquest. In a twisted way, she was as much a victim as I was. Almost. There's something else, Jenny continued. Rebecca wants to meet with you. She says she has information you might find interesting. I met Rebecca Torres that afternoon at a coffee shop downtown. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe late 20s, with the kind of professional polish that suggested she worked in David's world. Thank you for agreeing to see me, she said, settling into the chair across from me. I've been wanting to apologize for how I handled things at your engagement party. I should have found a better way. You did me a favor. I needed to know. Still, it was your special day. I'm sorry I ruined it. I studied her face, trying to reconcile this thoughtful woman with the anonymous figure who'd handed me the envelope and disappeared. How long were you involved with David? 6 months. I'm a paralegal at Fletcher & Associates. We were opposing counsel on a case last year. He pursued me aggressively, said his marriage was over, that he was filing for divorce. She laughed bitterly. I was naive enough to believe him. When did you find out about Victoria? 2 weeks before your party. I went to his office to surprise him and saw them together. The way they looked at each other, it was obvious they'd been involved for a while. Rebecca pulled out her phone and showed me a photo. I started following them, documenting everything. I was planning to expose him to his wife, but then I found out about your engagement party. The photo showed Victoria and David leaving a hotel together, both looking relaxed and happy. The timestamp was from just 3 days before our engagement. Why didn't you just send this to me anonymously? Why show up in person? Because I wanted to see his face when his world started falling apart. I wanted to be there for that moment. Rebecca put her phone away. Petty, maybe, but satisfying. We sat in silence for a moment. Two people who'd been deceived by the same man, brought together by his betrayal. What happens now? I asked. For me? I'm moving to Seattle next month. Fresh start, new job. For David? She shrugged. His wife filed for divorce yesterday. The firm's investigating whether to press charges for the billing fraud. His legal career is probably over. And Victoria? That's actually why I wanted to meet with you. She's been trying to contact me, wanting to talk. I think she's hoping we can somehow team up against David, present ourselves as victims instead of conspirators. The idea of Victoria trying to manipulate her way out of consequences didn't surprise me. She'd always been good at finding angles, ways to turn situations to her advantage. What did you tell her? Nothing yet. But I thought you should know she's not going quietly. She's hired a lawyer, claims David manipulated her, took advantage of her trust. She's trying to paint herself as another victim. I felt a familiar anger building in my chest. Even now, facing the collapse of everything she'd worked for, Victoria was looking for someone else to blame. She made her choices, I said, just like David made his. Rebecca nodded. That's what I thought you'd say. I won't be helping her with whatever scheme she's planning. That evening, I sat in my workshop, surrounded by the projects I'd been neglecting for weeks. The cabinet I'd been working on the morning David came to my door was still unfinished. Tools scattered across my workbench like evidence of a life interrupted. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Meet me at Riverside Park, 8 p.m. Come alone. V. I stared at the message for a long time. Victoria wanted one final conversation, probably to try the same manipulation she'd attempted with Rebecca. Part of me was curious what she'd say, what story she'd try to sell, but I was done with her stories. Instead of going to the park, I forwarded the message to Eddie with a note. In case something happens to me, Victoria was the last person to contact me. Then I turned off my phone and went back to work on my cabinet. Some conversations aren't worth having. Some people aren't worth the effort it takes to listen to their excuses. Victoria had made her choices. Now she could live with the consequences. The next morning, I found a note taped to my front door. I waited for 2 hours. I guess that's my answer. I'm sorry, Will, for everything. V. I crumpled up the note and threw it away without reading it twice. 3 months later, Eddie told me Victoria had moved to another state, taken a job with a small firm that probably didn't know about her history. David had indeed been charged with fraud and was facing possible jail time. Rebecca Torres sent me a postcard from Seattle. New city, new life. Hope you're finding the same. R. I kept the postcard on my refrigerator for a while, a reminder that some endings are actually beginnings. The cabinet I'd been working on was finally finished. It sat in my living room now, solid and well made. Proof that some things could be completed despite interruptions. Some things could be built to last, even when everything else fell apart.